Okay, so I'm Gledson. I'm a research software engineer at the University of Manchester. We're part of the IT department in Research IT. I'm going to be talking about fair access to environmental data. So I'm now working on a project which is the Digital Solutions Hub, which is a NERC funded project. And part of the reason that research software engineers have been brought into that project is our sort of pushing of, so we obviously join up a lot of projects, we work on a lot of projects, so we're in a good position to push the idea of using open data and open source software and generally open science. So I know it's not easy for everybody, especially with a smaller team and you don't always have the resources. I totally accept that. And I'd just like to say that 4 years ago, before I became a research software engineer, I didn't really know much about open data either, and I'm sort of learning as I'm going along as well. Okay, next slide, thanks. Okay, so why use fair open data? So it reduces repetition of data cleaning and data wrangling tasks, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And because of that, you can. The idea is, like, the big idea is that people can focus more on the actual research questions if they're able to share data. So also you've got this big idea that's come especially much into the forefront in the last couple of years, which is all about reproducibility, scientific reproducibility. So if you're sharing your data and you're sort of time stamping it and putting it on open platforms, which I'll talk about in a minute, it means people can go and look at the exact data used in an experiment, download it, and try and repeat the process. On a more sort of like individual or, you know, just a project level, it'll improve your visibility. So people who share data, sort of, you know, can publish papers around it, and they can become known researchers by that path. There's now publications out. So Nature have a scientific data journal. So that's all about sharing data and making data more fair. I'll also talk about fair in a second. It's easier to ingest onto platforms, so things like NERC data centers to ingest so if you want to put your data into a NERC data center, it has to be, you know, follow the FAIR standards. And also you can get citations from published data as well. It encourages collaboration and communities and networking, so things like you know, sharing benchmark data sets. Also, if you make a mistake in your data, other people can point it out. It's not a bad thing to make mistakes. We all make mistakes, so it's a way, you know, of sharing data and improving the data. And also funding opportunities. So a lot of funders now, for example, NERC and EPSRC, they want to see evidence that you're sharing data. And if you know, when they give you the money, they say, right, any data you produce, we want, you know, we want it back and be shareable within 2 years. And also, yes, something I forgot to say, I know some data is not shareable, so it's like personal data. So, you know, I know there's certain limits there for data that you can share. So, yeah, so you get more funding opportunities as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so data wrangling there's been some studies done, and it's known to take about 50% to 80% of data scientists' time. So one of the key points for me, because I also do research as well, and it's the fact that we can try and remove this amount of time and stop people reinventing the wheel, and the same sort of different people doing exactly the same tasks in their own silos, and sharing the data where possible. Okay, next slide, thanks. Okay, so the fair data principles. So there's like a fair data organisation, and their main principles are to make your data findable. So data and supplementary materials have sufficiently rich metadata and unique and persistent identifiers. So that's identifiers for the data set itself and each version of the data set, and also the people who produce the data set. You can have ORC IDs for people as well, so you can tell who's produced it. You make the data accessible, so you use metadata that's understandable to humans and machines, and you deposit in a trusted repository. So examples are Zenodo, which we use, which you'll see in a second, and there's also Figshare, and there's another one I've forgotten the name of, but it's in the links at the end. Interoperable, so when you use your metadata, you use a formal, accessible, shared language. You don't just sort of make your own one up. Try and find out if the one exists and follow that language to describe your metadata. So when you're describing your data set, the metadata you use, machines can sort of read it, and it's all interoperable with other data sets, so people can compare what we've got. And reusable, so data collections have a clear usage licenses and provide accurate information on provenance, so where the data came from, what the pathway of that data was. People need to know that if they're going to be able to reuse it. Okay, next slide, thanks. Okay, so I won't go into all of these, but for example, as I said earlier, the Nature Scientific Data has a set of principles which to do with, like, crediting scientists who share their data, reuse, quality, discovery, making it open, and service. So there's a full set there, so I won't go into all of those in detail. Thanks. Okay, so an example of a project that I worked on recently. So it's the Britain Breathing project there that's over on the right hand side. So we had lots of people with who downloaded our mobile app, and they were reporting daily scores for breathing, nose and eyes based on hay fever symptoms over the summer. And they also gave their location data and the date that they were reporting on. So we thought, oh yeah, we'll just download a load of environmental data on air quality and weather and pollen, and compare them, do some machine learning or just do some data, do some statistical data analysis, and we'll look for patterns. But it just didn't turn out to be as easy as that, and we spent about 2 years processing the data. So the data came from lots of different sources. So so we had the ORM data server, the MEDME data server, and the EMAT prediction model. Sensors often stop working. Pollen is very sparse geography, which is only 16 in the whole country. So we had lots of missing data problems, and we had to do a lot of imputation and sort of regional estimations of what, so if somebody's got a really bad hay fever in Manchester, the nearest pollen centre is in Chester. So we have to try and work out a way, what's the best way to try and predict what their pollen level is in that area. And then once you've done all that, you can then go and start comparing with the symptoms. So we decided to put a lot of effort into sharing that data. So we ended up with that nature data publication. It was a lot of toing and froing, but I know not everybody's got time to go through that process just for the data. But we decided that to concentrate our efforts in making our data set available for people. Okay, so next slide, please. So I won't go into details on this next slide, but it's just an example of all the different data sets that we're using to compare with the allergy symptom data from Britain Breathing project. Okay, so we use Zenodo to share our data. So Zenodo is hosted by CERN, which is the Nuclear Research, I don't know exactly what it stands for, Centre of Nuclear Research, something like that. So we use Zenodo, but there's also Figshare, and the other one beginning with D that's name I can't remember. So we did 2 data sets. So this is one example of what we did. We've got, those are our names there. We've got our auth IDs next to each name. Every time we did a new version, especially when we were writing the paper, they kept coming back saying, you need to change this and this isn't good enough. Can you sort this out? So we had a few different versions. Every time you do a different version, you get a new sort of DOI, and you write down in the description, what you've done. So you've got a bit of data provenance there as well. Is there anything else on there that's useful? No, I'll leave that for now. So yeah, just a description of data. That's that heart of our human readable metadata there. And oh yeah, so the NERC Digital Solutions Hub that I've just started working on since February. So we've got 5 to 7 research software and engineering roles at the University of Manchester. So there's one person, the RSE, that's technical oversight, which is me. And then another 4 to 6 are going to be working with each of the NERC under data centres, and they also have their own RSEs as well. And then we're going to have somebody who's focused on the Jasmine. So Jasmine is like a compute and data storage facility for NERC data. And the aims of the NERC Digital Solutions Hub and the aims of the RSEs on that is to convert a broad range of hub requirements into a set of tools that allow fair access to existing and future data sets. And to understand ways of working to ensure that the resulting tool sets are as robust and accessible for all. So we're focusing on making them accessible to non-technical users as well as technical users. Have I got much time?
About a minute.
Oh right, well I think I've put lots of, so there's open data links there. So if you want to find out more about open data, there's a webinar that's quite good that's recently watched by Helen Blaves at British Geological Survey. If you want to know about open science in general, because there's open science, there's open workflows, there's open source, there's lots of different parts of it. I've just focused on open data today. There's various, so that was Dryad is the one that I couldn't remember the name of. So that's 3 examples of data sharing platforms. And yeah, and then if you want to look at fair data principles as well, that's the website. And then if you go to the next slide, some of the links. So that's just on the project that I was talking about and the data sets that we published. That's the links there. And that's it.